Tonight, photographer, photo mentor, and live streamer Lee Love.
You found success in both of these.
You have to have passion for it. I have passion for both.
At one time in the mid-90s, there were 300 phone lines down here.
It's not the professionalism, it's your voice.
We could have a Dr. Phil moment here for about 80 people in this group. Every day we're communicating.
I was concerned about delivering a message that people could receive and gain something from.
Profiles from the Digital Green Room. Frustrated with irregular streams? You need WNDI 50. A potent blend of binary cappuccino coffee nuts and just plain stress will save your bitrate every time. Fix streams fast and never cry in a conference again. Profiles has been brought to you by the all-new Live to Air 6 and Live to Air 12, the most comprehensive and cost-effective live guest solution on the market today. Learn why the pros use Live to Air at www.neuralnet.com. Lee Love is more than a photographer. In fact, far more. Beyond his photojournalism, there is an artistry in his work, so much so that it often collides, facing off against the traditional with the experimental. For this Tampa Bay native, in many ways it seems, photography found him. Running with the wrong crowd in high school, cameras seemed interesting, but it was for the nerds. Though after seeing the yearbook team taking photos and students picking up the lens, Lee began what can only be described as a lifelong love affair. His obsession to learn led to a broader journey into broadcast television, marketing, business development, and music. In the 1980s, he was part of a TV production team producing sports for NBC and ESPN. In the 90s, Lee's inherent ability to connect the dots across business lines led to his becoming national marketing director for the iconic networking brand Novell. His passion to try new things even landed him in the recording studio, audio engineering for the million-selling inspirational vocal group GLAD later on. Today, with camera in hand, Lee Love continues to capture art through the lens of life. His new focus is Photo Mentor Academy and his weekly show Photo Mentor TV, both designed to help aspiring content creators create their own masterpiece instead of a mere picture. In his pursuit of passion with purpose lies the foundational belief that there is more to see than what's visible to the naked eye, that a greater vision awaits if we will go beyond the knobs and buttons and think creatively. Something that makes a split-second moment like this last as if it were meant to. Welcome, friends, to this second season of Profiles from the Digital Green Room. I'm Jeff Fitzgerald, Jeff in High Def, and tonight we're going to start off this year talking about something that might seem a little etherical. It's the word creativity, the word creative. And yes, we're going to be talking about photography, but the real focus tonight is how to take a picture that people will remember. How do you create an image, whether it's through photography or video, that speaks to people long after you've taken it and you've left and they're left with the imprint of your work? How do you take a photograph that will do the work for you, something that you might remember? I mean, there's many timeless photographs we can remember all across the landscape of American photography that speak to us. And so tonight we're going to be speaking with my good friend Lee Love about finding creativity through the lens of life. And so those two things are actually partnered. And with me is Lee Love. Lee, thanks so much for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Jeff. I really enjoy being here. I love watching what you're doing in the Digital Green Room, and I appreciate you having me on.
Well, you and I are close. I think everybody knows that. I'm close to many people here, but you and I are definitely kindred spirits. We met, a number of years ago. Let's start with the good stuff, which is, how did you find a passion for being a photographer, and really what was the catalyst for all that?
Well, it was I got an early Pentax camera, and it was black and white film, of course, like all of us would shoot. I set up a darkroom in my bathroom, like most kids did at that time. And so I taught myself how to process black and white film. But what really took off was, and I've always had this attitude that I can learn anything. I mean, pretty much if they give me a chance. So I walked into a photo studio in town, one of the bigger photo studios, and I said, "Hey, you guys need anybody to sweep up the floor?" And they said, "No, but do you know anything about processing film?" I said, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do." They said, "We need somebody to run our lab." I said, "Okay." So they put me in the back and with a radio, and I started processing all the black and white 4x5 portrait film they did, and they did large weddings at the time. And then I'd also process that film, and then I started shooting for them, doing portraits, and they sent me to a school in Indiana, believe it or not. It was a Kodak-run school, Professional Photographers of America, for 2 weeks, and I learned a ton of stuff. And so from there, it was just downhill all the way.
Downhill all the way. So, what was it like getting your first job as a photographer? Tell me about how that came about, and maybe some of the trials and travails with that.
Well, it's interesting because I think even back then, and even more so, I think you're really kind of afraid, and you don't understand the technology, exposure, light meters. There's a lot of craft involved, especially in the film business when you're shooting film. We don't have as much of that now in digital, although a lot of people still think there is. But anyway, and so it was really more concentrating on that. But I quickly learned that was not the business, because this was a small studio. It was me and the owner, one other person, and I learned a lot about the business aspect and what it took to really satisfy a client, make them happy. And at the same time, I was, pretty involved and really eager beaver kind of guy. So I also worked at the same time doing weddings for Olin Mills on weekends with 12 frames of medium format film. That's all you got, 12 pictures. And then I also worked in a modeling studio that they were doing, and I would shoot portfolios for these young models that were trying to become fashion models.
So you basically went from somebody in the shadows of the high school, hanging out with the wrong crowd, as you like to say, to shooting fashion models. Is that really how this thing went down?
Well, I wouldn't class that. Sounds a little more glamorous than it was. Of course, it certainly had its benefit, being a young guy, but still, it was really more of an education and learning and shooting a lot of different subjects. I think that was a thing. So I could go from photographing weddings to doing labs, working in a lab, processing black and white film, to photographing models, to doing, so that's really, I think, the lesson there is that by shooting a lot of different things, I learned very quickly how to approach a subject, how to photograph it, how to get the best out of it.
What was your technical journey like when you got a camera? Was it something that you felt like you really melded with pretty quickly? Did it seem to just become part of who you were? Sometimes we connect with our gear and things like that.
It's an interesting question. Yes, it was very easy for me because I had, I always had an inclination toward that, even as a kid. I won't go into all the gory stories, but I was always the kid. My brother and his friends would bring a tape deck to me and said, "Hey, Lee, well, how do I hook this up?" And it was like this, 8-track tape deck, and it had wires were cut and they were all different colors, and they didn't know how to work on it, or that kind of thing. Or I was working with my buddy down the street who we'd have a little radio station. We'd broadcast. We'd ride around on our bicycles and listen around how far we could get the thing to transmit. The point was, I always had an inclination for the technical aspects. So, but the interesting thing about what you're saying here, and I wanted to bring this up, is that I think there are 3 kinds of photographers that you run into, especially nowadays. There's the ones that are the artists. These people I admire the most. They don't know an f-stop from a bus stop. I mean, they just don't really know much about the camera, and they can see a scene. They see the world in a way that maybe you and I don't see it. The second one would then be the geeky guy, that's which I see a lot of those nowadays. They're into the technology. They can spout specs and talk about their pixel peepers. Okay, they can tell you what the ISO and all that kind of stuff is, but they don't. Their pictures, you just ask them to see some of their photos, and there isn't much to see. they may technically be accurate or technically look good, but there's no aesthetics to them. And then there's the third person, which has kind of got a leg in both. I think that's the category I fall into, where I struggle. I really want to be more artistic, and I push to do that if I get out of my own way, because I tend to be what they call left brain. There's left brain, right brain. Left brain is more analytical. Right brain is where the creative aspects and emotions comes from. And I think as to be a really good photographer, you have to have both, but you have to kind of lean toward that right brain to really turn off that left analytical aspect and really get in touch with the more creative side.
Who were your initial influences in photography? Were you, when you got into the production process, the darkroom, all those things, did you begin looking for, what we would call today influencers, things like that? Who was it that really inspired you?
Well, it wasn't a photographer, but someone that influenced me as a young child was Edison. I was really enamored with his inventions and what he had done and how he's been able to come up with these things, just really work on things over and over and over again to develop some kind of technology. But as far as photography, there were a couple of people. George Harrell is one. He did a lot of black and white film noir kind of stuff back in the 40s for Hollywood. And also Karsh, who did, there's a famous photo he photographed of Churchill. I'm sure most everyone has seen. And then as a little bit later on in my career, I was introduced to a guy named Pete Turner. And Pete Turner, the way I found out about him was I was into music and jazz, and the album covers were really these vibrant images. One of them is a woman that has these red lips, and that's the tight shot of the album cover. And I started looking into it, and he was the one that shot a lot of these things, and he was real well known for experimenting with color, very vibrant, intense, saturated color. And he also had a big influence on me.
I think that's a great example, because the next question I've got for you, Lee, really begins to delve into not just, like you say, holding a camera, remembering your aperture control, your shutter, and your ISO, all these basic things, all the knobs that we think are what makes taking a picture so wonderful. Creativity is really where it comes down, I think, in a lot of ways, in terms of how do you see an image that is memorable through the lens. I know that's a really wide open question. It may not even be something that can be answered in a single question, but everybody, I think, by and large, if they haven't really thought about how to be a better creative visionary, they kind of spray the room. Can't tell you, this, everybody who takes a photo with their iPhone, people are this big, and in the back there's the giant half of Walmart that means nothing in the shot, right? There's no human factor there, nothing in the foreground. But how do you see creatively the way you do?
Well, I don't know if I'm the greatest example of that, because I struggle like everyone else, but it really begs something that I've learned over the years of teaching. So, I've been teaching for 10 years or so, both one-on-one as well in classrooms and things like that. And by working with a lot of new young photographers, I realized that, at least in the last 5 years or so, I've realized that we've been doing this all wrong. We've been teaching people the wrong way to learn photography. So what I mean by that is that we're teaching them the same way I was taught with film. You go to any Facebook group and they're going, oh, you got to learn the exposure triangle, and you got to shoot on manual, and well, to me, that's like telling somebody that it's a new student driver, you have to learn to shift on a manual transmission and change the oil before you can learn the rules of the road. And I think that doesn't apply nowadays. So what I've really focused on is flipped it 180 degrees. The first thing I teach people is what I call how to see. That's the first. So what does that mean? It means, how do you learn to see light? Light is really what photography is all about. So if you start examining light, learn it, become a student of it, how it falls, what's it look like? What's it look like during this time of day, that time of day? The more you learn about light and study it, the better photographer you'll be. The second thing is learning space, and also then color values, things like that. Anyway, so if you start there, I don't care if you are using an iPhone. Okay, you can, in fact, I've had a lot of students ask me, say, Lee, why is it my iPhone pictures are better than my DSLR pictures? And the reason is they're not worried about their technology. They're focused on the subject and the emotion, which is the next element, and that's telling a story. So learning to see is the first thing to become a better photographer. The next one is learn to tell a story. Now, as someone that photographs, does a lot of magazine work, that's pretty much the primary job. I'll get a story, or they'll tell me what the story is about, and my job is to photograph images that back up that story, that reinforce the words that are in that story. So therefore, you're always looking for that. And it's the same if I'm doing advertising or commercial work. They typically have a message they want to get across or something. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is I see this all the time. A new photographer will put some family in the middle of a wide open field. And I'm like, well, what's the point? Why did they put them in this field? Is this field, are they waiting for aliens to land, or are they going to build a new house on this piece of property? Well, then it would be a story, but otherwise it has no bearing on why they're there. So I think that's the second really biggest element, is learning to see and then learning to tell a story, or at least attempting to tell a story. The background even can be subtle or in your face, but that can really have a huge difference in what people interpret an image to be. And I'd say if I had to throw a third thing in there, be like, remember, your job is to guide the viewer. They're looking at that frame. Your job is to tell them what's most important and where you want them to look. And a lot of people don't do that. And that's done through composition and a lot of other tools. But those are three things I would say that if you learn those, or try to learn them, because you never really master them, it's a lifelong adventure, you will be a better photographer.
Well, let's talk for a minute. When you say to be able to see these things, are there exercises that someone can do with a camera to practice thinking creatively, or things along those lines?
There's a lot of those kinds of things. Number one, here's a simple one. Go out and photograph the alphabet. In other words, you can use your iPhone, go out and look and say, okay, show me an A, look, what's an A and a B and a C. In other words, look for shapes, fence post, T, I, those are pretty easy. Z's are a little harder to find, but look for those symbols or those structures or those shapes and try to find an alphabet. That's a simple exercise. One of them I'm running right now in my Facebook group is called the non-selfie selfie. And it's what I've asked people to do is photograph a selfie without your face in it. What I want is to be able to see and recognize somehow that it's you, but without seeing your face. And there's something like that is a great way to be creative. There's all kinds of things like that you can do to learn to try and think outside the box and not just do a standard kind of photo.
Do you believe that kind of exercise in thinking will help video content creators, because you obviously do a lot with video and live streaming? Do you think that these photo skills can parlay into the video world?
I think they go beyond the video world. I think absolutely, but they go beyond the video world. Something I mentioned Kodak a while back, and I had been to this school and that Kodak was teaching, and they sent us out with these 4x5 cameras to photograph stuff. And one of the things I remember very clearly, they said, okay, photograph this stump, tree stump. I was like, okay, so what do? You photograph it like everybody else. I'm like, no. How about looking at it from the top? What about from the side? How about on the ground? The point is, what I learned out of that school was not to approach things head on. Look at them from all angles. And in fact, as a photographer, that's sometimes there's another third exercise. What I find is something that draws you to a subject. Oh, wow, that's really important. You'll approach it first, but if you take and walk around at 360 degrees or sometimes look behind you, you'll find there's a much better photo. So I've used this skill in problem solving. So instead of looking at a problem and saying, okay, how do I solve it this way? I now look at the problem from 360 degrees. For example, if I have to solve a problem, I don't think about how much money I have or what the budget is or what equipment I have. What's the problem? What are we trying to solve? Then I write down everything I could possibly do to solve that problem. Then I go back and say, okay, now here's some solutions. Which ones can we afford to? And what you'll find is you'll get the best answers and the best solutions by doing that approach. Most of us start with, oh, well, I can't do that. I don't have that kind of money. Well, let's see, what else can we do? That's the wrong way to approach it.
Well, I like the lead in there, because I was going to bring up the fact that one of the things that I most appreciate about you actually isn't your photography. It's the fact that you've got an incredible business acumen, and definitely in the area of market development, business development, and marketing, and those kind of things. First, tell us a little bit about how that part of your journey kind of came about, because that's something you did, speaking, all over the country, those kind of things. And then how do those skills, do you think, help work within the realm of being a content creator?
Well, I think you have to, again, I think photography is all about problem solving, first of all. I've said this many, many times. It's not a new photographers think it's about creating pretty pictures. It has nothing to do with the photos, to be honest with you. The photos are kind of only the medium we use to deliver the solution. But people come to me and they have a problem. They want to get a message across, or they have a new product, or they want to do a story, whatever. So my approach is, how do I solve that problem? So that came out of business as well, in the sense that I owned, when I was in the television businesses that we mentioned before, I think we mentioned this, I don't remember now. I was doing production around the country for live sporting events for ESPN. I did NFL, NBA. I've done every live sport you can think of, from arm wrestling for NBC to Super Bowl. But the point was, when I left that, I started my own business called Full Facts. And what I did is, people would hire me to book crews. So ESPN would call up and say, hey, Lee, we got tennis in Miami. We need 4 camera guys and 2 audio guys, blah, blah, blah. So I would book these crews. So I had run this business. So I started getting into databases and computers and stuff like that. Next thing I know, I opened a computer franchise that teaches you a lot about business that way. Running your own business, believe me, you learn or not. And then what happened was, I was approached by a company some of you may know, called Novell. And Novell at the time was a little $3 million company out of Utah. Well, they eventually became a $2.2 billion business 11 years later. And so I learned a lot about two-tier distribution, about building marketing plans, about product marketing, which is where I worked in. And then from there, I went to Netscape. And, you know, you guys probably have heard of Netscape. They had a little bit of influence on the industry, doing the same kind of thing. You know, going around talking to CEOs and CIOs of corporations and solving their problems and what is it they're trying to do and that type of thing. So I learned a lot about marketing in those roles and also how to solve people's problems. And that's really what it's all about.
So do you think that there is an advantage in understanding marketing when you're holding a camera, when you talk about circling your subject and looking for that view from every angle, when you talk about doing exercises, you know, where you're trying to look for the alphabet in everyday objects and things? Do you think that marketing has a play in terms of this? Because I think it's important. A lot of people like to think that only creative things help creative things. And I tend to think that marketing and things like that, actually, while they're not in and of themselves creative, I think they actually lend a lot of advantage.
Well, actually, that's a great point, because there's two aspects of that. The first one is that, I'll try and remember both of them. The first one is, yes, if you want to be a photographer, I don't care if you're doing family photography or even, I've had a lot of students say, oh, I'm a landscape photographer. I don't like photographing people. Well, I hate to break it to you, but guess what? If you want to sell your landscape work, you're going to have to learn to talk to people, whether it be gallery owners or customers. And the thing I taught a good friend of mine, unfortunately, he's no longer with us, Frank Lee Ruggles, who's a professional landscape photographer. Frank had this amazing body of work. And I said, Frank, the thing you need to work on is your story. People aren't buying your photos, they're buying the story behind the photos. So he started crafting that behind he'll tell you, I mean, I saw him in presentations say, because he started doing this, his work and his exposure took off. People just started loving and following him.
Oh yeah.
So that was a really big part of it. The same thing is true in now. I used to be a photojournalist, and I photographed, president and et cetera. But the point is, I didn't really care for it. What I discovered for me was there was no story there. You're getting the same image that most everybody else was getting. It was really hard to do something unique. So for me, that's why I went into advertising photography, because now I could be involved more early on in the creative process, in the business aspect, in the marketing aspect, because I could use that background that I had learned at Novell and Netscape in advertising. So, well, what's the product we're trying to, who's the target audience? What's our customer? What are we trying to say to these customers? That kind of stuff. How old are they? Blah, blah, blah. And so I could use that expertise in the image. So when I think first about that, then I think, okay, how can I translate that marketing or that message into an image? And that's where shooting things that are like emotional, like, how do you show love? How do you photograph love? How do you photograph, some emotion is a great exercise as well, because a lot of times that's what we're doing. And that's where I've learned the things I was telling you about with backgrounds and messages and storytelling, because every advertising piece is really a story.
Well, you hit on something that I want to go back to a little bit. I think there would be some value in unpacking it a little. You talk about people that only want to do their lane, right? I want to take, world-changing images or make a world-changing video, but I don't want to deal with people. I don't really want to do marketing. I don't want to deal with the business side of it and those kind of things.
Look, not everybody's a people person. I get that. And there's, they don't like people. They don't want to talk to people. I understand that. So that's not going to be your first inclination. But at the same time, you have to understand that it's your customers, your people are the people that are buying your product or service. So even if you're a landscape photographer, fine art photographer, whatever, your work has to speak to, you have to figure out who that audience is. So to do that means only you know that. So some people say, well, I can hire an agent or someone to do that for me. Well, the secret is they're not going to take you on until you already have an audience.
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
generally not going to bring somebody on they don't already have a clientele. So yes, I think you have to have some of that. I mean, you don't have to be super outgoing and bubbly and the life of the party, but you have to at least, number one, love what you do, be able to tell that story of what you do and why you do it and why it's important to them. And
Right.
I think that's also one part that's missing. And a lot of times people think, oh, they want to buy my stuff because I'm great. Well, they don't really care about you, believe it or not. They don't care about you or what you do. And this is another thing I see on new photographers' website. Oh, I fell in love with photography and I'm so passionate. And guess what? They don't care. What they care about is,
right.
What are you going to do for me? What are the results? How is your work going to solve my problem? Whether it be family photo, whatever. And so you have to be in touch with that. I think the best photographers are the ones that are the most curious, most inquisitive people on the planet. And I think you have to be, Ansel Adams has a quote, something about that there are two people in every photo, the person in front of the lens and the person behind the camera. Well, what he's saying there is that we bring our experience, our life experiences, what we read, our music we listen to, the movies we watch, all play a part in the images that we shoot. And that also has to do with video, right? The products that we produce. That's why they hire us, because we are unique. You are unique. Only Jeff Fitzgerald can shoot the way Jeff Fitzgerald does. I can't do it. And so therefore you need to exploit that. That's your value, really. And so whether you like people or not, that's what you have to figure out, how to get people to understand about you and why they want to work with you. I don't know. Sorry. Maybe I don't know if the answer
it was actually really well said.
Okay.
I think a lot of times creative people, especially, are that they don't feel equal to somebody who's in business. I think, if I'm just being transparent, you've got game,
look, we're all
maybe
look, none of us we're all that way. Believe me. I don't care if you're artists or not, but for the most part, artists are always, and just a quick story. I've lost so many people say they submitted their photos to the client and they haven't called them in an hour. They must have hated them.
That's
it's like,
right.
hey, calm down. These people have lives, and you're not
That's
the
right.
center of the universe. Let them, give them a couple of days. If you don't hear from them, find an excuse to contact them. Hey, did you get the photos? Is there any problem? But people get all nervous because they didn't hear right back that, oh, they're going to hate my work because they didn't call me in the first hour.
I think the bigger reason why I wanted to bring it up, Lee, was the fact that I think so many creatives get taken advantage of because they don't know their own value. And that is such an overused thing these days, especially.
Yeah.
You know, if you look on the internet, everybody's supposed to have their own job. Nobody's supposed to work for the man. Everybody's supposed to reach the mountaintop. Nobody's supposed to live through a valley and have severe bouts with self-doubt and faith and trying to figure out who you're supposed to be or how do you get there when you know you're not that person at that time. But you know that there's, what's that old adage, the starving artist we've heard about for years, and it's because a lot of people in business get taken advantage of, and in creative work get taken advantage of. And so my point, I guess, Lee, is with your mix of, you know, business acumen, the marketing, and the creative, I think that's a potent mix, and I would just encourage other people to not be afraid to learn these other things, to feel like that you can get on an equal playing field with somebody, because when you do know what you're worth, you don't ever want to rip anybody off. You know, you never want to take advantage of anyone, but you can definitely look them in the eye and say, you know what, my work is worth this level to me. And if you want me to be able to elevate your brand, to be able to do more for you, to give you something that will set you apart in a real meaningful way, this is what I need to work with. And I think that will help in the long run for hopefully a lot of folks. What do you think?
Well, one of the problems we all have is that we carry this baggage, which is our own value or our own understanding of the value of money. Okay, so like, okay, wow, I'm going to spend $1,000 on this phone. What are you, crazy? So we bring that to our customer, and that is that's a really, really hard lesson to get rid of, but it's something that's very, very important. It's not about what you think it's worth. It's what they think it's worth. So for example, let's take a professional football or a sports figure. They make millions of dollars. Are they worth that? Why are they worth it? Well, it's not that they're worth it. They probably don't think they're worth it, but they're worth it because they bring in revenue, because of what they do, not so much them specifically, but what they influence. Okay. So if I'm working on a $20,000 ad campaign, it's not about whether I think I'm only worth $500. I'm not. Okay. I'm going to charge what I'm worth based on the job I'm doing. So that's the problem that I think we all have, especially in the streaming and the video production business. It's the same issue. We think, oh, wow, nobody's going to pay $500 for this. It's not about that. It's about what's the value of the end product and what you're influencing. So let's pick on streaming for a second, because this is what we do here, okay? Yeah. If you're doing let's think about it. In the past, there was a conference with all these people and ballrooms and food and AV and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then you go in and you say, oh, I can do this stream job for $1,000. Well, what's up with that? That doesn't make sense. That's not an equation. It's not, has nothing to do with your cost or your equipment or anything. It's the value of what you're providing to them and the money they're actually saving based on how they're doing. So that's just one way to look at it. But the point I'd make again is reinforces that we bring our own values to money to the job, and that's not the way it should work. It has you should not be able to afford your own work. Well, I tell people, you want to be a professional photographer? Guess what? You got to go on a job interview every freaking day. That's because think about it. Every time you talk to a client, you're going on a job interview. How fun is that? It's not fun unless you love what you're doing and you really, believe in it. But that's different. But the point is, it's tough. And you got to be willing to get rejection as well, because that's the other part of it. It's like, well, I don't know, you're too expensive or whatever. They don't like your work, whatever the issue may be, and they don't select you, it's rejection. People are like, oh gosh, I suck. I'm never going to get another job, right? So that's the other thing. I've totally gotten over that. Okay. It took me a long time, but I never mind losing a job because of price. Okay, because I know what I'm worth, and I know what the job is worth to do it right. That's the other thing. They'll ask you to do a proposal, and you'll give them a proposal to do it right, the way you would do it. And they say, oh, I don't know, do we really need this? Or we really need that? Well, do we need an assistant? Well, no, you don't need an assistant. It's going to take me 3 times longer to do it, so it's going to cost you more in the long run, but you don't need an assistant, that kind of thing. So that's one part of it. But I'd say the that's kind of the low part is that you're, like in a lot of us nowadays, we're working for ourselves and you don't have the water cooler conversation.
right.
You have social media, which sucks. Talk about a time suck, by the way. You can spend 4 days in answering these Facebook posts. Anyway, so that's the downside. For me, one of the things that turned around for me that was really a big point was that when, again, I made the decision to move from photojournalism to advertising, because photojournalism, first of all, as anyone will tell you, is a young man's game. You're running around there and you're carrying all this gear. Like when I was covering the 2008 presidential elections, I'd have to be there at 4:30 in the morning for a 10 o'clock speech. You got to go through security and all the, the dog sniffing, all your gear and all that kinds of stuff. And then you're sitting on a podium next to AP and, ESPN, or not ESPN, CNN and Fox and all these. You're getting the same shots everybody else is. So it's kind of bum. So when I moved into advertising, that was a high, because now I was really able to get involved earlier on in the creative process. And that's what I really love to do. And so for me, that was a big change in my career. I don't know if I'm sure I could think of some tough decisions or tough things that are ups and downs, but you know me, Jeff, I'm a half full kind of guy. I don't think about that stuff. It was done. It happened. It was in the past. I'm moving on. So
Yeah,
I don't really dwell on that kind of stuff too much.
Yeah. And I also took note of what you said about rejection. That is another big Achilles heel with creatives, because we're so close to our work. Like you said, you send off the photo to the client and they don't respond within 15 or 20 seconds. They don't like us. It's not, they didn't like the work. It didn't fit their model or didn't fit what they were trying to do on their end. It's all about me, right? So the more distance we can get there and not be afraid of being told no or being told, hey, you're not the right answer. I guess it's like if you were to walk into one of these stores on Rodeo Drive that have $15,000 watches, and they say it's $18,500 for the watch, and you go, well, I can't do it. I don't think they feel rejected. They know their value, And so you have done a lot in the world of journalism and news and things like this. This is one of the more compelling photos that I found. This is from, I believe, 2008? John McCain?
This is John McCain, and this was in Alexandria, I think. And I was on a podium with a whole bunch of other photographers, and I think I had a 400 millimeter 2.8 lens, a big giant lens. And the bus started pulling up, and I whipped around and I started shooting this here. And the magazine just loved this photo. They just went crazy over it. And it just, catching him with that wave there and the people in front of the bus and everything, and the title Straight Talk Express really was a neat moment. And it was a fun thing to shoot. And it's just kind of an interesting, covering political campaigns can be really boring if but they can also be fun if you can kind of, interesting, like you grab the right shot.
These are the kind of photos that I think really speak to the work I've seen with you, Lee. Not just a photo, but a photo that speaks to motion here. You've got some blur on the glove. There's the crunch of the curve between the darks and the lights, and they're more dramatic and things like that. Tell me about this photo.
Well, I did a series of boxing photos. First of all, you should know that I love interesting people. I seek interesting people out. I'll look at people in the grocery store. They probably think I'm some weirdo, which I may be. I'm like, I'd love to photograph that guy. I've only had one person that kind of freaked out when I did that. Well, that's a whole nother story. But anyway, so I was doing a series on boxing. These are young boxers. And I like that cinematic kind of look. I'm not afraid. I love lighting. I'm almost obsessed with it. So I'm not afraid to have the lighting in there. It shows the depth of the picture in there. And so I also like making people heroes. And so that's, to me, one of the examples that kind of makes him look like a hero, young boxer trying to, improve his skill.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it spoke, and that's, like we talk about photos that can speak without words here. Here's another one. Now, this is a 2-part series, so you got to set the story up on this. These were really intriguing and very, very well done.
Well, it doesn't come across to people that don't know me very well, but I have a really good sense of humor, and I love to laugh. I'm always laughing.
Yes, you do.
And I love to inject humor into my photography. So the story behind this is at the bottom in the basement of $1 million home, a model home, and one of the guys there is a builder, and he builds these homes. And the other one there, one of the other guys is a friend of mine, and he says we play poker down there. We play these poker tournaments. So immediately I'm thinking, hey, interesting subjects, right? They think they'd let me come down and do some portraits. He's like, sure. So I went down to scope out the scenario, and I saw this room, and I thought, oh man, there's so much more we could do here. So I came up with this concept, and it's tongue in cheek, of course, probably not politically correct, but who cares? And that is, if you look at the clock, it's 9:30 at night, and they're playing, and they're not paying much attention. They're, ignoring the woman. And by the way, this woman is also the stylist that I hired. So she said, I'll play the model part. So they put on this makeup, make her look all kind of goofy and, not unattractive. So anyway, they're playing. Now, again, part of the story is I went through and I learned a lesson here, by the way. You can't Photoshop money. You can't scan $100 bills, I learned. But what happens is it gives you an error when you do that. So I went through and I made all this money. I'll show you in the next shot. The cigars, I took cigars and put them on my shop vac and burned them down. So so this next shot is 4 o'clock in the morning. All of a sudden, the woman is beautiful. They've got deeds on the table. There's all this cash on the table. They've been drinking. One guy's lost his shirt. They've got this big growth on their face, and they're like, all of a sudden, hey, and so it was kind of a fun and tongue-in-cheek kind of thing about how, men are and that kind of stuff. So the way the story was, I had them shoot this. I told them, I said, don't shave for 2 days. So they showed up, and this is the first shot we did. So that, because they had their growth and on their face and everything. And then we did the other shot that you saw before. So anyways, that's kind of my little way to have a little fun with something. There's like 5 lights on this shot. It was pretty complex system, but it was one of my favorites.
Yeah, there's a lot of dramatic lighting going on there and a lot of elements at play. And speaking of things that I think are highly creative, you also did this. You've actually not only dabbled, but done some really cool things in 3D modeling and animation and things like that with Cinema 4D. You built the Snow Peaks in a 3D software program.
Yeah, so this was a Comic-Con in Richmond, Virginia. And so I had a little studio set up there, and I was doing this for a magazine, and I was shooting these guys, and they'd come through, and I'd photograph them. And this guy I photographed, and I said, well, tell me, who are you? Because I don't know anything about comics. Right? He goes, well, we're the Nords. I said, oh, well, what do they do? And he goes, well, I think it's a game, if I'm not mistaken. He says, we're warriors, and we live in the snow, in the mountains with snow. And we, I was like, oh, okay. So I started thinking about this more and more and more. And when I got back, I looked around. I could not find a background that I really thought was representative of the image. So I taught myself how to use Cinema 4D to create these mountains and the sky and everything, and then photoshopped him in there, added the lightning and the birds and everything. And it was just an exercise to see if I could do it, and what was involved in creating cinema, CGI backgrounds, which I now realize is fantastic. It's a great capability to be able to do, because you can take, it goes back to what I said earlier on, right? You said, how do I get in photography? Well, I was a painter, or I wanted to be an artist, but I couldn't draw worth a hoot. Well, this is my way of drawing, because I can take elements now, especially with Photoshop, combine things that don't exist in the real world and make my vision come true. And that's one thing I love about digital photography.
Well, it's just a nice world to be able to meld the all of the background that you've got there, the journey between the business development and the marketing, and then not only the creative coming into it as a kid, as a high school kid, and then adding in things like 3D elements and things that are virtual and things like that. I think that's a well-rounded way to approach creativity. Where do you think the future of digital photography and digital video are going at this point? Things are moving really fast.
Well, look, it's the same thing I say about photography. It's the same thing for video. It's never been it's just a wonderful time to be in this business or have anything to do with it, even as a hobby. The tools that we have are fantastic. The cost is nothing compared to what you people think you have to pay for this stuff. So it's really your own limit, what you want to do. And I think that's the problem. We've lost the vision.
Mhm.
People don't have vision. They don't have creativity. They're not pushing themselves to be more creative. They're just trying to recreate the stuff that other people have done. And I think that's the real limitation. It's not so much the technology. I think there's going to be all kinds of virtual reality stuff and that kind of things like that, which may or may not be of interest. But I think that there's still, I mean, I'll tell you what's interesting is I see a huge, huge growth in film. Believe it or not, I
Yes.
see so many young kids buying film cameras and shooting film again because they think it's cool or they like the look of it. I was talking to one photographer she's a wedding photographer. She travels all over the country and she shoots with film. And the reason is because her work is different. And that's, I think, the deciding. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about digital photography or video. But one thing I've learned is that if you look at why people get hired, it's because they see the world differently than somebody else.
Yes.
And you look at, the Annie Leibovitz of the world. Okay, let's just pick on her. Is her work any better or any than other people that have been before her? Or, no, maybe not. But they hire her for the way she can see. They
Yes.
say they'll come to her with a concept, I'm sure, and say, here's what we're thinking. How would you shoot this? I've worked with many ad agencies, and that's exactly what they'll do. They'll go through my portfolio and they'll see stuff from Audi and stuff I've shot from, commercial clients. And then they'll stop on a photo that's like the ones that you were showing with the poker game. They'll say,
Right.
tell me about this one. And what they're trying to find out is how you came up with this. They realize you produced the photo. You did the background on it. You came up with the concept. That's what they want to know is how would you approach this problem or how would you solve this problem? And that's what I think is going to be the key to any future that we do in this industry, whether it be digital or not, is to really work on your own creativity and how you can solve a problem more creative than somebody else.
And every bit of that starts with believing that you've got creativity. I think a lot of the people that I've talked to, even here in the green room, a lot of folks I think feel like creativity is kind of a one-off. It's an outlier. It's not something everybody can have. And I don't believe that for a minute.
No, anybody can be creative. I mean, it's amazing. It may be in a certain area. You may have to work on it, may have to hone it, may have to learn it, like you exercise it just like you would any muscle. But creativity is really just about how, and again, it goes back to what I was saying before about what you read, what you watch, the music you listen to. All that plays into how you see the world. It's the uniqueness of your view and your vision that's what makes you creative.
Let's take the last few minutes here and talk about what you're doing with Photo Mentor Academy and Photo Mentor TV. Tell me, really, I think we've got the genesis of how it could have come about with all the wisdom and skill you've got. What are you trying to do for the aspiring photographer?
Well, that's a great question. So not to get too personal, what happened was, I've been teaching for about 10 years, classrooms, individuals, stuff like that. I do a lot of one-on-one consulting, coaching, and things like that. And what happened was back around mid to the end of 2019, a good friend of mine, I call him Dr. Joe. He was a physician. He owned 5 radiology centers in the area, multi-million-dollar guy, of course. And he was one of my students, and I would go teach him Lightroom and stuff like that. He called me up and said, Lee, he said, I've just been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I've probably got about 6 months to live. It just really, really hit me hard. And I was like, oh my gosh, because I knew this guy, and I've never lost that many people close to me. So anyway, the point was, I said, it was a wake-up call. I said, I've got to do something more. I've got to reach out more. I've got to help more people. What I'm doing now is too small. So I started doing some research, and I spent a lot of time joining Facebook groups, beginner Facebook groups, as a place to start. And what I realized quickly, got so frustrated, the people in there that are answering questions don't know what the hell they're talking about. So I would see people post a photo and say, well, tell me what you think about this. And people were giving their opinion. Oh, I like it. I don't like it. Well, I don't know what their qualifications are. Do they even own a camera? I mean,
Yeah,
so
really.
it doesn't do any good to get feedback. If I said to you, if I said to you, oh, Jeff, I think your work sucks, but you've won 2 Emmys, what the hell do I know, right? So it's the same kind of thing. You got to know what the people's background are. So the point is, what I would see, the answers I would see are what I call YouTube answers. They've watched it or they've read it somewhere and they repeat it, but they've never really done it in the real world.
It's
And
academic.
so I said, I've got to fix this problem. I got to do something. So I started this thing, which is rare for me. I started this YouTube channel and I did it for maybe a couple of months and it was too freaking hard. I just couldn't stand all the editing and it took me 10 takes or more just to get my name right. So I said, this isn't going to work. So I said, I got to do this live. I'll just go mistakes and all. And so I started Photo Mentor TV. And I started this back in July of 2020. I've got over 80 episodes, I think, now. Every week, I would do a live episode answering questions or taking a topic and helping, seeing stuff I saw people had answered incorrectly and answering them correctly. So that's grown into something that's been pretty popular. But then I realized, I started a Facebook group, people in there. And so then I realized they really want more. I mean, the problem with Facebook and the problem with YouTube is it's one way. People want coaching. They need to talk to someone. They need to answer questions. So the word mentor is very, very purposely picked because I want to see them do better. So I started Photo Mentor Academy, and that's more of an education site. There I'm diving in this whole thing I talked about: seeing, telling, processing, exposing and processing, that whole methodology. I teach that in there. I just finished a 4-part lighting, how to do outdoor lighting. Start with a speed light, on camera speed light, and I work way up to a $2,000 pro photo light. So the point is, I'm really able to dive deeper. I do one-on-one or group coaching in that scenario. So it was really an outgrowth of a frustration of me seeing people getting bad information or myths repeated over and over, and just being so, tired of answering and going and writing these long posts going, I got to fix this. So that's really what that's all about.
Well, and you've done wonders with that. I mean, it's, you know, I talk about this all the time. Like so many of my other friends, all of you watching here in the green room, it's a journey to build something that doesn't exist, and in my mind, I've had this for years. I've had this like vision of it's like a word picture, but I can see myself. Everybody's on a highway in life and they're happy. There's not a thing wrong with it. They're safe. They're doing the thing they were predicted to do. They get up, they go to work, they come home, they go to sleep, and there's no stress, but there's no highs, there's no lows. And, I'm one of these guys that, kind of would love to live in the Braveheart world, but I don't feel like I've ever been that brave, but here I am with my machete, and along the highway, I stopped my car at one point and said, you know what, I'm going to start cutting a little bit of the grass here and the weeds, and I'm going to try to make a new road here that I think would be a good road for where I want to go, in this direction in life. And it feels
well, it's
a lot
hard
like
because
that.
you said it earlier. We're very self-conscious as artists, right? We're afraid. What
Yes,
if I
we are.
look? I'm a guy that spent his whole life behind the camera, not in front of the camera. The last thing I want to do is get my ugly puss in front of the camera. But but at some point you got to go, okay, this is more important than me. And that's really where I think the impetus to getting stuff done is you got to go, okay, I don't care what people say. I don't care if they like it. I don't care if they like it, dislike it. It's true. It's based on fact. And therefore that's just the best you can do. So we're very sensitive as artists and as people that are in the creative world. So it's tough. I totally get it.
I forget where I heard this, but I really love this metaphor that if we think in terms of horizontal relationships rather than vertical relationships, there's no such thing as a totem pole in the real world. Where is the criteria to say that person A is better than person B, and in what context and what boundary do we shape that in? But if you think of yourself as a radio station, if I'm Jeff 105.1 and you're Lee 103.2, playing a lot of the old 70s hits that I hear a lot of times coming out of your studio, you think about it in terms of we're like a radio station. we put ourselves out there, whether it's what maybe is perfect for other people or not, but it's us. It's our original you. And you'll find people who listen. You know, there's never been one radio station in America, as lousy as many of them have been, who've never had any listeners. They've got people who will come as regulars and get behind them in their own tribe and in their own vision and help them move on their own way to the promised land. Lee, before we go, what would you leave with folks in terms of, number one, how to deal with being too focused on self in the process of being a creative? How do you move from wanting to do something bigger than you are, because that's what a dream's supposed to be, and actually, like where you are on your own journey right now, how do you get to where you move from thinking about it as an enthusiast to doing it as Lee Love?
Wow, that's a great question. For me, I can only speak for myself, but the first thing is I have to get out of my own way. I have to say, okay, look, it's not about me. If I can help one other young photographer get inspired and become, look, I don't know about you, but I've had people mentor me in my life that have done things that just changed my entire life. I could tell you stories about a guy at a radio station who would help me out and show me how to record and how to come down to the radio station. And I was like, wow, this made a big difference. Someone took some interest in me. So the first thing is you got to realize that you're there to help somebody else. It's not about you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there are what? I don't know, 3 billion people in the world. Nobody cares. All you got to do is find those people that like what you're doing, nobody else. Okay. And the second thing, what you touched on is a great analogy that I've used very often. It's very much like music, right? Some people like the Stones and some people like Lady Gaga. Guess what? You think Lady Gaga cares because someone likes the Rolling Stones? No, she doesn't. Okay. So you just have to, you play your music and you find your audience and you keep playing it over and over. And eventually you're going to resonate with enough people. If you're good, you get better and better. And you put yourself aside. You ignore the people that are naysayers, and you just focus on the people that appreciate what you're doing. I know I've used this analogy on you before. Maybe you remember it, but if you're walking down the beach and there's somebody drowning, and you're like, "Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm not a very good swimmer. I probably don't want to go over there. I'll just keep walking." You wouldn't do that. You'd try and save the person. It's the same thing we're talking about here. Why, if you can save one person or help one person along in their journey, you never know what an impact it's going to make in their life. And so put yourself aside, try and help somebody else, work on service, and don't worry about what it means to you. You're going to get people that hate you. It's just the way it is.
And a lot of times that hate actually is more to do with the other person than it would ever be with you, because everybody's battling their own challenge, and sometimes
if nobody hates you, then you're not getting a big enough audience. Probably you got to work harder on that.
Well, that's exactly right. It's one of these things where you got to figure out, just how to put that first foot in the right direction. But Lee, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and I really appreciate your friendship, and I appreciate the mentoring you've given me over the years. You have definitely been a Dr. Phil, we could probably put that in there as well. And I appreciate what you do in the green room, because one of the things people hear me say all the time, and I actually feel like maybe I'm speaking to like just the outer darkness, because I don't see a lot of people coming forward, but there's a lot of people who've actually been part of the green room for a year, because it started December of 2020. Get out and try these things. I mean, you signed up for a reason. There's got to be some interest there. But if you're always on the sideline and always worried about, like you said, how am I going to do it? Is it going to work? Anybody who watches anything I do like this, you're going to see mistakes, and mistakes are part of the journey. And I love what you said at the end of one of those questions, is that you decided to just accept the mistakes and move forward anyway.
Yep. I developed I almost got fired, I think, for it, because I developed a saying when I was with Netscape. I was in New York speaking to a large group of people, and I stood up and I said, look, we're not perfect. We just suck less than the other guy. And I thought the VP in the room was going to inhale his tonsils. But that's my motto. It's just the way it is. Okay, I'm not perfect. I just suck less than the other guy. That's all I got to do.
Lee, thanks so much for just a wonderful wealth of information. And we really appreciate all you're doing in the world of photography and digital video and live streaming through the Photo Mentor Academy, helping others. And certainly all the best on your journey to your promised land. Until next time, this is Profiles from the Digital Green Room. I'm Jeff in High Def, and I'll see you then.